let's sort of return to the basic question. We already mentioned it a little bit, but is nuclear fusion safe? So the power plants that we're talking about, fusion power plants, are they safe?
Yes, fusion power is fundamentally safe. The physics and the reactions of the fusion system itself means you don't have runaways. And so we've talked about some of the human factors around power plants and power systems and industrial scale systems. And that's something that we build into the design of these from today. We look at how these systems might fail. And in fact, some of the analysis we do is we did this analysis for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission over the last few years, looking at how do you regulate fusion power? As we're building the first fusion power plant, we need to make sure we're regulated safely. And so we spent a lot of time doing the technical case and the political case in the United States of how to regulate fusion. And so the analysis we did is assume you have a fusion power plant that's operating. And then at any one time, a meteor strikes it. The whole thing is vaporized. What is the impact of that? So this is worse than you could ever imagine an actual physical scenario, but let's start there. And the answer is you don't need to evacuate the populace nearby the fusion power plant. And one of the keys I think that I come to when I think about this is the fuel. In that in a fusion generator, you are continuously feeding in this hydrogen, these deuterium fuels. And at any one time in a Helion fusion system, and most fusion systems, you have 1 second of fuel in that system. And so what that means is if you stop putting fuel into that system, fusion just stops. But what it also means is that if something really catastrophic happened and for whatever reason, you have all of that fuel that's not in the system. And fusion is so hard to make happen. You hit it with a meteor, you do anything in that nature, and fusion doesn't happen. That hydrogen, that heavy water, that deuterium just goes back into the environment safely and cleanly without issue. And so that's the fundamental safety mechanism of fusion. And you can compare that with other types of power plants, oil or a coal power plant. You might have a large pile of coal that then catches fire and burns. And it's not catastrophic, but you have a large coal fire for a long time, releasing toxic fumes that you may have to deal with. And in nuclear power and a fission power plant, you may have several years of fuel sitting in the core. And in that case, if something bad happened, you have all that potential energy for things to happen. But in fusion, you have literally 1 second of fuel at any time in the system. And having a tank of deuterium, which we have around all the time, can't do fusion by itself. It needs that complex system.
I love that there's like a PowerPoint going on in a secret meeting about like what happens if a meteor hits a fusion power plant. Okay, so that's really interesting. What about the waste? What kind of waste is there for fusion power plants?
So the fusion reaction itself is still fundamentally an atomic reaction. And so during this reaction, you do create ionizing radiation. You create X-rays, you create neutrons, and you create all these charged particles. The charged particles themselves for a fusion reaction are all contained in the fusion system. And the X-rays, similar to, think about a dentist's office, although a lot more than that, but that type of same X-ray and X-ray energy is absorbed by the fusion system. But the thing we do care about is those neutrons. And so we do have in a fusion system activation. During its operation, neutrons are made and leave. And so we have to shield these fusion systems during their operation. And so this is very similar. And in fact, this is a lot of the work we did with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission over the last number of years, that there was a landmark agreement that happened for the NRC that then was codified into law last year called the Advance Act, which is really powerful because it says for the very first time how the US government, leading the way on this, which I'm really proud of, will regulate fusion. And this gets into a little bit of the details, but the way the Nuclear Regulatory Commission regulates nuclear things in the United States is in these different sets of statutes. And nuclear reactors are regulated under what's called Part 50. And there's a lot of variety of the regulatory language around that, but most of it is to handle special nuclear materials, uranium and plutonium. But Fusion is not. Fusion is regulated under something called Part 30. And Part 30 is how hospitals are regulated, particle accelerators, other types of irradiators, where as they're operating, you have very high energy particles, ionizing radiation, and you have to protect operators from it. And you have to shield them. And so we build concrete shields. And if you came and visited Helion, you would see plastic, borated polyethylene, and concrete shielding to protect operators and equipment from the fusion reactions while they're happening. But again, you turn them off, and those fusion reactions stop. And that's really the key. There's a funny story related to that. We've been building fusion systems that do fusion a long time. And at some level, they got powerful enough, doing enough fusion. We started building these shields and shielding them like a particle accelerator. And I went to the regulatory bodies that regulate Part 30. This is in Washington State. It's the Department of Health. And so I went to the Department of Health and said, here's an application for a fusion generator shielding permit as a particle accelerator. And the very first question I got asked was, great, where do the patients go? Because the standard form had a patient as a hospital, the patient dose for the particle accelerator, and then the shielding. And we talked all about the shielding and the operators, which is very similar for a Helion system. And we said, no patients at all. No one's inside this thing. Our goal is to generate electricity one day. This was a lot of years ago. And we were able to go through and work with the state agencies to license these fusion particle accelerators. We were, as far as we know, the first licensed fusion system ever as a particle accelerator for those first systems. First license we had was in 2020. We then have gone on and now licensed several of our fusion systems that we've built that do fusion, both the shielding as well as some of the fuel processes.